Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, running about 95 degrees possibly, about to have a conversation with John Bookwalter of J. Bookwalter Wines in Washington State. Introductions in just a moment. Had an incredible conversation with Jessica Hirschfield regarding her Just Enough canned wines, premium canned wines in a can, of course. Have a listen to that. And there's some great episodes on the Armenian wine industry, which I'm going to talk about today with John, about what they're doing, how they're emerging. 3 episodes on location in Armenia. Check that out. But not why we're here today. Here to have a conversation with John Bookwalter. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
What do you call yourself? President, CEO, winemaker,
forklift driver,
head honcho, forklift driver,
chief dishwasher, whatever it takes, whatever hat I get to wear.
Bo Barrett called himself Chief Serpa.
Yeah, that works. Hey, whatever title you want to give me, I'll answer it.
So what are we doing down in L.A. today? You're coming from Columbia Valley, Washington.
Yep.
One of the great wine districts of the world, in the country, if not.
It sure
anyway.
is.
What's happening?
So came down for a tasting in Hermosa Beach yesterday, and then tonight we've got a dinner at Rustic Kitchen. So down for that, and then this opportunity popped up, so here I am.
Well, this is grand. I mean, of all the things you're doing this week, I mean, Are you kidding?
This is a good use of my time. Yeah. Not a bad place to be. It's cooler here than it is at home, so it's all good.
I'll tell you a funny story about the Uncorked people real quick. We hang out down there very much. I was at the Bottle Inn, which is a local. I took my wife there for our first anniversary. That's how long it's been there. And I handed the bartender, or the guy who was pouring the wines, my card. And I stuck it between 2 people, like at the corner of the bar. And the woman says, "I want one." I go, "Okay." So I give her my card. She goes, "Oh my God, you're Paul Callan-Carrion?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "You're a legend." I'm like, "Don't tell my wife that you said this, because, or please tell my wife."
Please
one
tell.
of the two.
Yeah.
But I'm now, because of what we've done with our company, I'm so impressed with those people. They've got this corner wine shop in Hermosa Beach. They've opened another one in Manhattan
Beach. Yep.
And it's packed every time I go by there.
Yeah, they're great. They're really friendly people. I think they've cultivated a good clientele. Really nice people. And frankly, it was a really nice evening.
It's kind of what we need in this industry.
Yeah, you got to break it down. Got to make it friendly, make it approachable.
It's in some kind of corner wine shop where the person tasted the wines, where they can explain the wine to you and get out of these mainstream shelf items.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I have not had the Bookwalter wines till today, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And I think that the value level is extraordinarily high. Let's go back to the beginning. I read that you were 10 generations of agriculture in the Washington State area.
Not all in the Washington State area. It started in Pennsylvania in the 1600s and then migrated across the country.
Everybody knows this,
Nebraska.
Right?
And then, of course, my dad's dad was the first to move to California in the San Joaquin Valley. And so he was a walnut farmer,
Wow.
at the time. And he raised earthworms and worked in a grocery store. Did a little bit of everything, of course, in those days. And then my dad was the first to move from, we were living in Atwater at the time, actually, and then he was the first to move to Washington in the late 70s, or mid 70s.
Well, there is money in worms. Everybody knows this. I'm not kidding. I just saw it out on Facebook that.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know anything. I haven't been around worms in a long time.
Buy a worm farm.
Yeah, maybe we should.
But in Pennsylvania, 1600s, and then coming here, I think the American story, that's 10 generations is pretty.
Yeah, they were Mennonites, and they were run out of Germany, I think, and that's how they ended up in Pennsylvania.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so my son-in-law, who's a priest in North New York, had a whole congregation of Mennonites in the other day. It was fabulous, he said.
Yeah.
And they went to dinner, and he said it was really special.
Oh, cool.
It's kind of cool, yeah. So not always grapes then. We were doing other things.
No, Dad, went to Davis and got a degree in pomology, which is a degree in fruits and nuts. And so his first job out of college was working for a gentleman named Bill Silker in San Jose, and it was a peach orchard.
Wow.
I think you can't say you farm much in San Jose anymore.
No, right, yeah.
And then he worked for Dole in the Delhi area and also in peaches, and then almonds as well. And then he worked for an almond cooperative called Cortez Growers in that Atwater, Turlock, Delhi area. And then he bought a farm in Atwater that was almonds, as we say in the valley, because we knocked the L out of it, of course. And then,
Yeah, right.
yeah. And then it was peaches, and then we had some Thompson Seedless actually on that property. And then in the mid 70s, he lost his job at the cooperative where he was GM, and he saw this opportunity in Washington. He figured he'd go fish and hunt more, which is what he wanted to do. But it was it was about 1,000 acres in total. Half of it was cherries and apples, which he had more experience with, or with tree fruit. And then, of course, the other property was a vineyard. And at the time, of course, that was the largest planting of vinifera grapes in Washington. It was planted in 72.
Wow. That's interesting. 72, which is the founding of the Wine of the Month Club. But really kind of recent history when it comes to wine world, particularly in the world of wine.
Oh, we call it zygote.
Zygote.
Yeah.
Because really, seriously, early on, 72, to the millennial, that sounds like a long time ago, but when you're talking about a crop that's only you get one chance a year to do anything with, it's really not that long
It was
ago.
trial and error, too.
Yeah.
We didn't know what we could grow at the time. We thought it was just Riesling, cold hardy, because we had these hard winters, and so it had to be something that was winter hardy. And so that was Riesling naturally. But at this property, they planted a little bit of everything: Chardonnay and Cabernet and Merlot, and of course Riesling was predominantly what was grown on that property at the time. And Saint Michel was the largest,
Good old Saint Michel.
of course, the largest customer at the time. But Dad couldn't sell. He was pretty much production ag at the time. It wasn't for high end wines. So he was growing 5 to 7 tons an acre, which is a lot in Washington. And he was having to sell the product all around the country.
Wow.
So he'd fly to New York and Chicago, and he brought in guys like Harry McWaters at Sumac Ridge, one of the early Canadian wineries. He'd bring in Bobby Fetzer, Jerry Lohr, flew around with him.
Wow.
And then also the early Pinot guys, David Lett and Dick Erath, also made Cabernet from that vineyard in the early days, because he was just looking for customers. He was growing almost 3,000 tons off this 400
That's
acres.
almost like Prohibition days, shipping grapes across the country.
Yeah, it sounds
trying
like
to
the
find
Gallo
somebody
family.
which you would know.
Yeah, a little bit.
But the industry in Washington, first of all, the Columbia Valley, probably the most prominent, well-known district of Washington for wine. But it had to be very tiny from an actual production style. Chateau Saint Michel probably was relatively young, actually, at that point. But there wasn't today's proliferation of wineries then.
Yeah, there probably wasn't 5,000 tons in the mid 70s being produced, and I don't know, that might have been off of 1,000 acres or so.
Wow,
there wasn't
that's
much
phenomenal.
in the early 70s. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that Columbia touts is the latitude of Bordeaux.
Yeah, 46 parallel.
And then we talk about how great Bordeaux varietals do there, which is true. But then also the Chardonnay we tasted today, what I thought was gorgeous. And you said something funny. You said, what did you say? You're a Chardonnay?
I have a healthy disdain for Chardonnay.
Healthy disdain for Chardonnay. Why is that?
I think it's one of the more innocuous varieties. It needs help. I think in Washington, our soils are probably not the most suited for we don't have any limestone. There's no clay. We're very sandy, loamy soils. So I just don't think our soil contributes to the aromatics and to the profile of Chardonnay that maybe you come to expect from Old World. So, for me, I do a co-ferment in our readers lineup with Viognier, which lifts the fruit, which is what I felt needed if you were going to make a stainless, non-malolactic style Chardonnay. This one, the one you tried, the double plot, is, a little bit of concrete ferment, stainless ferment, neutral French, and new French barrels. So it's got a combination of things to make it and lift it and make it a more balanced Chardonnay. So, I guess maybe because I have that healthy disdain for it, we put a lot of extra effort into it.
I have a healthy disdain, so I'm going to make a really good one. But you said something important in the balance, because we've tasted a lot of wine here over the years, and I felt the structure of that wine, the balance of the wine, the acid content, the minimal oak, really still represented Chardonnay in a great way. And so here's a question that I often ask in this situation. You mentioned you do some concrete fermenting, you do some stainless steel, you do certain times of oak treatment. Why do we do this? What are we trying to get to when we start using winemaking techniques to craft something that best expresses where it's from, expresses your personality? What are we trying to do?
Well, I always thought wines are an outward manifestation of your inner self, and so are brands, and so I think they're very intimate in a way. So I'd say it's more style, and you're trying to build complexity, and frankly, we're trying to make something that's delicious. That's our job.
Drink, right?
Yeah,
yes.
Hopefully it smells great and it tastes as good.
Right.
That's our job, and that's what I focus on. I know my palate maybe is not perfectly aligned with every consumer out there, but I think if we find it delicious, I think most of the time we find our customers find it pretty enjoyable.
Because of your generational history, and so you see as a farmer and in agriculture and then now as a winemaker and a winery owner, that you only get that one time a year to try this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a rather slow-moving needle.
Well, and we have an
figure this
outdoor
out.
factory. We don't control the inputs.
Right.
So if you
Ooh.
think about that equation alone,
Yeah.
that every year we have to adapt to what Mother Nature is offering from us. And I tell you what, you talk to the old farmers, no matter where they are in Washington, they'll be like, yep, 50th straight year of unusual weather.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Okay, that's funny. And it's an important saying, particularly in the wine business, because the grape is so representative of that.
It is.
Right.
It is a time capsule for the environment.
It's interesting. So all these years of history in agriculture, I've never asked this question, that no one has come in here with that kind of history, but any other crop, walnuts, peaches, cherries, as you mentioned, have that reflection like that? Besides volume. I mean, we know that if it's a good or bad year, it's got more volume, but how about the reflection of what was going on in that?
I think that is truly what wine embodies.
Yeah.
It's that time capsule of a year, right? And no other fruit really expresses it the way wine does, especially because we can age it and it's value added with our winemaking. So it's very unique in that regard, and I think it's what we have to lean into because we're fighting against, we're battling against other beverage categories that have no story and, for that matter, very little flavor.
I went to a tasting on last Tuesday. I was expecting to be this boorish, guys. There's like 9 guys. It's a monthly thing, blah blah blah, and we were to discuss. Hey, nice spider on the floor there. We were to discuss the.
Hope it's not poisonous. Is it near me?
We were to discuss the wines that he poured, and one guy sponsors the thing. Anyway, he brought a vertical of Penfolds Grange, and I didn't have a lot of experience with Penfold Grange. I've tasted a few, but this guy has gone to great expense and great study to find vintages back to the 80s until the early 2000s. And we're supposed to guess what it is, blah, blah, blah. But what I came away with after all the wines we've tasted was saying, this is clearly a vertical because the expression of each vintage was solely that. In other words, the winemaker got out of the way. The winemaker let the wine express itself. Some had more character than others. Some had better structure, whatever. But that's not the point. The point is let the wine speak of what was happening.
I mean, that's what our job is, to usher in the provenance and the pedigree of a vintage. I mean, I think it's my job is to show you our soil and our fruit,
right.
and get out of the way, as you said, with my winemaking habits and characteristics.
I think that's where the passion comes from, that you get to do that expression.
I mean, that's our job.
That you get to figure it out. Well, but there's
it's a maturity too.
Yeah, it is a maturity thing.
Yeah.
So and this part was interesting to me for your career because you were in agriculture, family. We talked about that. But you went off to probably the most guerrilla-oriented marketing company in the country, and whose model has been repeated and depleted 1,000 times. You went off to Gallo. Was that to find a position for yourself as a sales guy, or just get you acclimated to the industry from that aspect?
Yeah, I had no designs of coming back. The winery was started the same year, probably not coincidentally, the same year I went off to college in '83. So I didn't grow up around the winemaking. I grew up around agriculture, of course. So, and Eastern Washington was not a place that I felt like I needed to hang my shingle. I grew up on the farms. I'm like, I got to get out of this area. So going to school in Arizona, and then Gallo heavily recruited at ASU. Mm-hmm. So it was a great consumer goods job. It was one of the most coveted consumer goods jobs at the time. Sure. Pepsi-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Gallo was right there at the top, paid well. And their training is second to none, and it's boot camp. It's military. It's militaristic.
They get a lot out of you, don't they?
Oh, there was 300 of us sales guys down here, like we were soldiers.
But you're in Arizona, and they came on campus recruiting, and then where did they play? Where did you end up?
Right here in Southern California.
Oh, SoCal.
So yeah.
By design, or you asked for that?
No, that's who recruited. It's actually for the Gallo Wine Company, which is the distributor for Gallo.
Yeah, right.
It's wholly owned in Commerce City, right?
Right.
So that's where they were recruiting into, and of course I had spent my youth coming down here because my mom grew up in Southern California.
Which of the brothers was the most active? Do you remember?
Well, it was Ernest. On the sales side. I mean, the reason you purchase wine in grocery stores is because of Ernest Gallo. Right. There's no question about it.
So I did, in 1989, a gentleman came to my office. I thought the guy was nuts. I thought his idea was stupid. And it was Mike Houlihan from Barefoot Cellars. I won't bore you with the whole story, but it's fascinating. And he left, and I was new to the industry. Maybe I was around here for a couple of years at that point. And I called my dad. I go, Dad, this guy just left here. And I go, what a whack job. I mean, he's got this stupid idea, the Lafitte of California, barefoot, He'd taken the name from Davis Bynum. But he told me in a podcast recently, I went to see him in his home in Forestville. He says, I was watching Ernest out in the field, Gallo, fronting the merchandise, going to the stores, like not letting the clerk of that store control what was going to happen with his brand.
Oh, they were demanding. I mean, I liken him, Sam Walton walking in stores, with his notepad. It's the same thing. Ernest would get in there and look at the dust on the bottles. I mean, he was meticulous and demanding.
And so that experience in corporate America, and then, I try to explain this to people when we get into wine, because you probably have the same issue I do, is that most dinner conversations end up about wine. But, there's so much about the business of wine that is misunderstood and needs to be told. And those guys were relentless. And your experience in corporate America, how did that shape what you understand about what you're doing today? Because now you're on the other side of the fence. You're trying to produce a product the best you can, and now you got to get it on the street.
Well, I didn't rise that high up in corporate America. I mean, my last role was the business manager for Coors Brewing Company in the Northwest. So, I had Alaska, Washington, Northern Idaho, and Montana, with 5 regional reps underneath me. So, but I was more focused on the sales and marketing aspect of beer at the time, and
it's the water, right?
Yeah, right. It was. Yeah, I can tell you a joke offline about what Pete Coors said about it one time. Anyways, in a bar. Great guy, by the way. I really just had a great foundation for sales, and that's, and I say sales is all about 3 things. It's follow up, and follow up.
That's true. Great lesson in the world of sales. I was at corporate America selling stuff. So, and I would never have traded that for anything. Yeah, and so I think that experience, whether you felt like you were, president of the company or not, is irrelevant. It's really that you're out in the streets, you're managing people, you were seeing consumerism, you were seeing people buy, and what it takes. And building
relationships with your wholesalers is key in a 3-tier system, of course. And so, when I came back to the winery in '97, the first thing I did is I called up all my old Coors distributors that were wine wholesalers, like in Montana. Sure enough, I just gave them a call and said, "Hey, I'm back over here. Will you take on our wine?" They're like, "Yep, absolutely."
Wow.
We had good relationships.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. So the first vintage for J. Bookwalter Winery was what?
Well, Dad's first vintage was 83.
83.
Yep.
And do you have any of those bottles left?
There's a few Chenin. So he made only white wine the first year. So it would have been Chenin Blanc, Muscat, and Riesling most likely. He was working with a gentleman named...
All first year, short...
so all, quick cash flow. That was the key, right? Because he borrowed $100,000 to start the winery.
Really?
He had no money. So he went to the local bank, had a relationship, said, I need a line of credit for $100,000 just on a personal note.
That's can't do that today.
No, I don't think so. I'd have to have a $10 million line of credit. Yeah, I'm lucky if I can borrow anything.
Somebody.
Yeah. So
you can't do that, particularly in agriculture.
Oh God, no, nobody'd bet on this anymore. So they, sure enough, he got it from the local bank. He got a $100,000 loan and bought some fruit, bought some bottles, bottled it up, turned it into cash, and just kind of kept going. And he made mostly, when I arrived at the winery, 14, 15 years later, 97, he was 90% white wine production. There was very little red. Now we're predominantly red.
Did he have that sort of risk tolerance type?
Because the year he resigned from the Sagemore Farms, Backs and Dionysus Vineyards, which he moved to Washington to manage there in the mid-70s all the way until 82. In 82, like every good entrepreneur, he started 5 businesses, all related to agriculture, land or agricultural development, grape brokering, and then vineyard management, and then he started the winery. So 4 or 5 businesses at the time. So yeah, he was always a risk taker, and and in some cases it didn't pay off.
Well, that's what we do. But that's fascinating because there's people that can't take those risks, but they had confidence in themselves, or like, who gives a shit about it work?
Yeah, he definitely had the confidence.
Do you feel that way about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a risk taker. The folks that I've always looked up to were entrepreneurs that carved out their own niche and did their own things, and I respected those guys. The original wholesalers that I met, for instance, in Montana, Earl Sharon and Bob Zucconi. You tell the stories of these guys. You got Bob Zucconi, was nicknamed Zeke, in Helena, Montana. How he started his business. He rented a truck, drove to Colorado, picked up a van load of Coors, and drove back to Helena. He goes, he was a bartender in a bar, and he opened up his back doors and he started his wholesaler. And when I met him, wholesalership, when I met him 30 years later, he owned banks and you name it. So that's, these guys, I just loved hearing the stories and a lot of tough days too, right? But these are the guys I really looked up to.
Sometimes it's not about the money. Like, yes, of course you do things, you got to earn a living, you got things to do, but it's more like the challenge to get something done and to move the needle somewhere. Maybe to get, as a salesperson, as I am as well, I always got great satisfaction in getting somebody to see my point of view and understand that I can help them or not help, whatever I was doing at the time. I think it's a fascinating part of my personality, or a personality.
Yeah, in sales though, I always say you went from hero to goat very quickly in sales though, right? You're high as a kite when you make your big sale, and then the next day you can't sell anything. So I like the idea of creation. That's where winemaking kind of fed my soul a bit, because I'm creating things that people can take home and find delicious, hopefully 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the line. So it gave me a little more fulfillment on that side.
That's awesome. That's could we do that today? Could I come up with Nick here? Let's say it's more than 100,000.
Yeah, probably a little more. I could start there.
And even in Armenia, we were just in Armenia, and I think I mentioned in the intro that I did some podcasting there. They're already saying there that it's very difficult to invest in a winery and then start getting cash flow and brand it, market it, get it on the street. Clearly in Napa Valley, that's impossible. And unless you're part of the 70s group that paid off their land, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But can you walk into Washington and say, look, I'm going to buy a vineyard that's planted, maybe a structure, maybe start as a farmer, and possibly squeak this out?
Over time, it's a long play. It's not a short play.
No.
And but I think there's still less of a barrier to access in Washington due to land prices, and cost of living where I live in Eastern Washington is much less than it would be anywhere in California or certainly the west side of Washington. So it's possible, but you have to have real stick-to-itiveness and an ability to say, look, I'm going to look out 20 years. I'm not going to look out 5. I'm not going to look out 10. I mean, if you talk to Europeans, they talk about generationally. Mm-hmm. When the Antinori family launched Col Solari with St. Michel in Washington, when they came to town, they said, this isn't for this generation or even the next one. The 5th generation will make money off this winery.
Wow.
You have to think generational.
I suppose if you don't think that way, you're going to be awfully disappointed.
Well, yeah, it's not, because we're so used to seeing, tech companies go from 5 million to 50 million in 1 year. And you're like, I can't scale that way. And especially if you're growing, your cash flow never exists because you're building inventory 2 and 3 years out, depending on the type of wines you're making. All of our reds most of them are aged at least 15 months, if not 2 years. And, so you're constantly, if you're building.
For the listener, we'll just peel that back a little bit. For the listener, we've spent a lot of money on vineyard land. We've spent that much more money, if not 3 times that, trying to plant it. Mm-hmm. Then so we've tied up a lot of cash. Then we spend 3 to 4 years waiting for that first leaf.
Third leaf, you'll get a vintage
that's
out of
working.
It. Maybe a ton.
And it's not going to be the best leaf,
No.
Well, even though apparently Warren Winiarski's first leaf that he bottled is what won the Judgment of Paris. So that kind of screws up that theory.
Yeah, there's that theory out the window. Yeah.
But you've tied up a lot of cash, particularly in crops like a Cabernet or a Merlot or a Syrah that needs aging, that's never going to see anything necessarily. And I can tell you that this company, I survived years on the fact that the 2017 was on the floor, the 2018 was in the tank, and the 2019 was being picked. And so that 17 had to go somewhere pretty quick with cash to get it out of there so we can move the needle. And you can't plan for all of that.
No, I mean, did you pick the right variety? I mean, how'd the vintage treat you? Again, we have an outdoor factory. I mean, every year isn't a 95-point wine.
It's an interesting problem. So you think you could possibly do it, unless you're part of the tech firm where you did make a lot of money, you just buy whatever you want. You don't care if you make any money.
Which seems to be the model in a lot of wine regions.
I always wondered this, so maybe you know the answer. Like, if I'm one of these guys, so I always figured early on as either you're an eye surgeon or a government contractor building freeways. That seems to be where most of the money came from in Napa Valley when it started. But, if I thought, okay, I've got this alluring romantic lifestyle that I want to, portray to my friends and my family, so I'm going to buy this wine. I'm going to hire this great winemaker, and I'm going to build this incredibly gaudy chateau. And all of a sudden you realize, it's A, it's farming, and B, it's not that easy to make money. You know that you'd have to start at $150 a bottle. That marketplace is small. They don't know who you are. Do you think they get disillusioned at some point? Like even these guys that have all this wealth behind them, that they might get disillusioned at some point with this?
Well, I think they get disillusioned to losing money. I
guess
imagine over time if they've been successful at doing that. It's it's speculative real estate, I think, in a lot of these places, which, is probably a reasonable bet. But yeah, is there an ROI on the product at the end of the day? Even at $150 a bottle, if you're paying $350,000 an acre and then you're putting it in $1,500 French oak barrels and you built a winery that's $1,000 a square foot minimum now, probably minimum. In many places, maybe more. The ROI is not there. I think it's pleasure. It's like having a cigarette boat. It's just there for enjoyment. There's no, probably it should appreciate, but who knows?
I think that what I get to in a lot of these conversations is there's this irony between the romantic lifestyle and the reality eventually. 100%. And I had a podcast with Gary Fish from Gary's Wine Marketplace. Great guy, maybe you met him.
I don't know him, but
great
I know
guy.
him, yeah.
And I was up in Napa. We went there, and my wife was so excited because he offered me a job. He goes, come up to the valley, once a month for a couple of weeks, and I'll put you on the floor. I'm like, cool, I'll do that. He just closed, and I only did this podcast maybe 3 months ago, and he closed last Friday. Oh, the big wine shop in the middle of the Napa Valley.
In middle of Napa, yeah.
Now he's got his New Jersey things that are very successful.
Right.
The point I'm making is consumerism is changed in this industry. How is Washington first, your marketplace is primarily Washington? That's the first question. And the second is, has the consumerism there changed much, or what have you seen?
Well, yes, to answer a couple of those questions. So we certainly are Northwest focused. I mean, 70% of my wholesale business I'm in 34 states with our wines. 70% is done mostly in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. A little bit in Alaska, but definitely Washington's the lion's share of that. But what we see is the consumer's fragmented. In this next generation, the attention span's short. Brands have short lives. We're all about what's new. And so our category is too fragmented in many ways, and brand loyalty is hard to come by.
Yeah.
So I think that's the real difficult bridge that we have to build with our customers. And I'm not sure Washington's any better at it. We're good at doing it with our Northwest patrons who are provincial as they should be. I think we all should be. And I think that's where a lot of brands live, in that provincial kind of domicile, if you will.
That's an important comment because Washington has grown, and people like the wines. The wines are world class in the structure, and it takes these 20-something vintages to figure that out. It doesn't happen overnight. And I was talking about the winery, the Armenian wine industry, and they're asking me to help them understand, the landscape of marketing wine, which I knew. And then,
yeah.
So, but the point being, they have the same questions, but they don't even have remote luxury of having a provincial neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's Turkey, Russia, and Georgia.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
To get out of a country and try to sell Armenian wine in California is almost virtually impossible. So your consumerism is kind of embedded there. And you have a club.
Yeah, we have a wine club. It's sizable, and we have a lot of our members are going to be at the dinner tonight. So,
how is it stable?
Yeah, we're stable. I mean, it grew during COVID, oddly enough, for us.
Crazy.
It's softened up a little bit with kind of the headwinds of the economy and interest rates and what's going on currently. But we maintain. I'd say we have small, modest growth every year in our club.
That's very
and
good.
People are still discovering Washington. Let's just be honest about it. There's 60,000 acres planted in Washington State. We only harvest maybe 250,000 tons, comparable to California that does 4 million tons in a harvest or more.
That's amazing.
We're relatively small, but I think, and I failed to mention it earlier, one of our sales propositions, if you will, and you mentioned it right out of the gate, was our PQR. It's our price-quality relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I think we make incredibly captivating wines at reasonable prices.
Absolutely.
And that's comparable because when you look at Old World and some of the famous chateaus and you look at what the top end guys in California are doing, we're a fraction of those prices.
That was a legit, honest comment from a guy that's been tasting, wines for 35 years. and wines from the Northwest, they're not always this inexpensive. And if they are, they run the typical gamut of character that's not so interesting. But this had interesting character, good balance, and the price was amazing. I'm bringing some in. Just so, as an anecdote, when I sold the company, they bought all the inventory of my regular merchandise.
Okay.
But like you during COVID, maybe not like you exactly because I bought too much, but I'm like, they're buying whatever I tell them to buy.
Right.
Right.
Well, they trust you.
Yeah. And so I was selling Camus at $140 a bottle, and I couldn't keep it in stock.
Right.
When if I did that post-COVID, I wouldn't sell a bottle.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's a fact. Yeah.
And the price actually has come down to like 99.
Yeah.
This is for the liters.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was buying some Grand Cru Burgundies and some Premier Cru and maybe some classified growths. And I literally have 3,000 bottles here that I need to take home.
Well, let's go shopping.
I don't have a cellar at all. So I'm literally
This is the cellar. You sold your cellar.
They're finishing it today, actually, so I could move some of this home. But the one I'm building is only holding 1,800 bottles. So I'm kind of messed up on this. But I found that the consumerism has changed, and I think that's great that your club has survived and not only that grown, because the commercial club business, like what I was, has met a lot of headwinds. Mm-hmm. And I think the value of a winery-based club is this loyalty, is this connection, is this dinner you're doing tonight. Yeah, a very important part of marketing your
it's
product.
Our relationship. It's our brand contract. I mean, if you get to know our wines, I don't bottle anything I don't stand behind. And I have multiple tiers. I have my entry level tier that you enjoyed, and then I go all the way up to some reserves that are in the $100 price range. But every one of those, I think, meets that price quality relationship that I would expect as a consumer, that I think is, again, my contract with you as a customer. And you get to know us through our tasting rooms, and I have 2 restaurants too that, I think you buy into what John has to say about his products.
It's an important part of surviving this, because I
don't see us surviving otherwise.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
Wink, the big, one of the large, I think they were doing $250 million in sales. They went bankrupt. It ended up being like a Ponzi scheme where they were spending money to acquire customers, paying off the previous group that they bought.
Yeah.
And it was mainly because they were buying 60 cent a liter stuff from the middle of Spain, putting it in a fancy bottle, spending a lot of money to find somebody to try to buy it, and then not getting a repeat sale.
Yeah.
And you're the exact opposite of that.
Again, I mean, did these people come through with their promise of a good quality product?
Right.
And maybe it wasn't there.
Have to have that.
Yeah.
Have to have that. How are ratings for your guys? Do you seek them? Do you chase them? Do you care about them? Or do you think they're completely diluted and overrated?
Wow.
That was a pun, huh?
That's a loaded
and
question.
James Suckling is coming in today. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no. Ratings are still leaned upon by certain channels. I'd say the retail channel definitely leans into reviews from your top reviewers. But thankfully, we are seeing a decentralization of opinions from a Robert Parker and a Wine Spectator to Dunnock and Suckling and Vinous, and you have other, and then you've got folks like yourself that people trust to tell them about wine. And we know that wine, the number one reason you purchase a wine is if a friend or family member recommends it. Well, number one is if you've tasted it and like it. Right. Number two is if somebody close to you that you trust. Number three, way down the list, probably is a rating. So yeah, we still seek them. We do well with reviews, but I also don't find that I've never gone into a restaurant and had that conversation. They either like it or they don't like it. They buy it based upon their personal opinion of the wine. I've never had a score conversation with a restaurant owner or
really?
A chef. Never, not once.
Because when they came in here all these years, they would bring it up, and actually the smarter reps would say, do you care about scores? They'd ask my opinion first.
Sure.
And then I'd say, yeah, my score.
Right.
Those are the ones I care about.
Yeah.
But I sense, and I had this conversation briefly with James Suckling at a wine tasting not too long ago, and I said, I want you to come on the show and defend your scoring system. Defend it. Defend how you have 6 tasters and however you get it done, and defend what the purpose is. Because really, it's not a 100-point scale.
It's a 10-point scale. It's a 10-point scale, 100%. Yeah.
And in places like Trebecchieri, they're doing puffs, and I even called Bartholomew Broadbent, the son of the great Michael Broadbent, English critic. Yeah. They used 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
My dad used the UC Davis
20-point scale.
Yeah, the 20-point scale.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. I do have consumers in my group, even friends of mine, that chase the wines that are scored like that, as opposed to having a chance to taste them.
Yeah, I think it helps for those collectibles. I think it probably helps, I wouldn't say ours are collectible necessarily. So,
Well.
I just think it does, it gives you that affirmation that maybe you need if you're a novice wine drinker that says, oh, this gets good reviews and it backs up, maybe your palate or what you think about a wine. And I think that's important for maybe the entry levels. But once you develop your palate, then, I'd say it becomes less important.
What do you tell you have the dinner tonight?
Yeah.
When you speak to your club members or anybody that joins dinner or tasting, and I've done a couple with Nick and some really intelligent winemakers, what do you tell them? What do you talk about? What is your approach to them saying, this is what wine's about? This is what we want you to understand about what's in this glass and in what we're going through at the winery?
I actually spend more time speaking to Washington first.
Yeah.
Because I think we have to debunk some of what the consumers think about Washington when they think, well, how do you grow grapes in the shadow of pine trees?
Oh, really?
Because
so
they
that's
think
like,
of Seattle.
Well, it's Retsina. It's going to be just like
they think of Seattle. They think of how it's so cold and wet. And I'm like, oh, you haven't been to Eastern Washington,
That's
one of the
interesting.
driest commercial growing regions in the world.
Yeah.
It's a perfect climate for wine. 46 parallel. You intersect Bordeaux, Northern Rhone, Tuscany.
Yeah.
I mean, these are pretty famous
Wow.
and successful wine regions. And so hence why we grow Bordeaux varieties and Rhone varieties very well.
Yeah,
So,
that was a question I didn't get to. But
yeah, I
that's
speak to
interesting.
Washington first and our growth, where there's 1,050 wineries in Washington state. But 950 of them are below 5,000 cases. So you're never going to see a lot of Washington wines because they sell all from their cellar door, or they sell all to their club members, or right there in the Northwest. So I always speak to our area that we get to grow grapes in, because that is what is in the glass. And again, I think it is my job to shepherd in the provenance and the pedigree of our soil and our environment. And that's what's in the glass.
And we try to have them understand that expression in the bottle. It's hard to do. It's hard for them to say, look, this is what we're about. In fact, the Armenian group, and I want to get into your commission here in a second, I'm telling them the first thing you need to do is appellate this place and start to define why the Vayat store, I'm going to say words you don't understand, Vayat store and Adani and the Ararat Valley, why they're different.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So that the consumer can start to sort of sense this. The enthusiast or the non-enthusiast can just taste properly structured, well-made wine and maybe perceive some differences to help. Because my job at this show is to sort of give people the back-end look of what we do and what we understand and what you think and why you think it.
I think, though, that can also be a disservice in a way, because I think we struggle with this in Washington State. There's 21 AVAs in Washington. How many can you name?
Well, that's true.
I don't know if I can name them all, and I live there.
I couldn't.
And I've been part of those. And frankly, I can't tell the difference between some of the AVAs in terms of taste profile. And that's what part of an AVA is. It's supposed to be a district that has a profile, right? Not just a geographical profile, but a flavor profile.
Right.
And I think we're struggling with that. I think Washington would be better served by fewer, but we get more and we lean into more about what is Washington. I still don't think the consumer, I think we've got great relationship with the press. I know that we do really well with the press. I know we do well with sommeliers and master somms and the wine critics and the purchasers, but it's the consumer that we still have to build a bridge to.
That's right.
That doesn't understand maybe Washington wines. And I mean, I get asked, the most prominent question I get when I'm around the country doing wine dinners, how much Pinot Noir do you grow? I'm like, no, we can't grow Pinot Noir. Well, there are some people growing Pinot Noir in Eastern Washington.
There are some,
but it's not. We're not really built for that variety, and everybody, because Oregon's done so well behind one SKU. They leaned into Pinot Noir and they own it.
Yes.
We've leaned into what? Cabernet, Merlot.
Right,
we
sure.
think could be our best variety.
Right.
Chardonnay's not bad. The number one SKU out of Washington State is Columbia Crest Grand Reserve Chardonnay.
Right. Yeah.
Millions of cases is sold. A lot of people think when I was on the commission, we'd do studies ahead of time with the consumers. And a lot of people thought Columbia Valley was somewhere in California.
Oh, well, that was close. Columbia Crest, what a brand. That was, I didn't know it was still around, actually, but it's
our largest,
popular.
it's the single largest brand in
It was very
Washington
popular
State.
in the day.
Yeah, it's still very popular.
Wow. Is there an organic movement there?
There is, and biodynamic, certainly Christophe Baron's done amazing work under his Cayuse label, of course, really establishing that. The cool thing about Washington is, right out of the gate, we are almost organic because we have so little pest pressure and disease pressure in Washington, because we're a hot, dry, windy climate that the vectors for diseases like Pierce's disease and phylloxera don't survive or like our soils or like our winters. We might do 5 sulfur sprays in the spring, and that's a week in
Really?
California.
Wow.
They might do 20 in Napa because we don't have any moisture in the springtime, or very little. So we roll out of bed almost organically with very little need of pesticides and herbicides.
So, I think the idea of organic has always been organic. You always would want to be organic. You don't necessarily want to do that stuff if you're doing it right. Right?
Correct.
And we didn't have those things even 50 years ago. They didn't even have them. Maybe 100 years.
Come on, the reason these movements came around is because we were all destroying the biological culture, if you will, in the soils. I mean, the biodynamics, dynamic growing was born in France because they were so the other side of that,
right?
Frankly, so yeah.
I think, we talk about it with a lot of wine. Like one of the winemakers in Italy would tell me, "My kids are playing out there," Yeah. I've said this before, and I don't want it. And what drives me nuts about our industry and many others in this case is we were organic. Let's just call it organic. We were natural, as whatever that word means. Then we created all this crap because, like you said, we destroyed the what was going on under the soil.
Yeah.
And then we're pulling back and we're rewarding ourselves. We're patting ourselves on the back for going back to what it was in the first place.
Yeah.
And what it should have been. And then some wineries are using biodynamic as an excuse to create, like horse manure tasting wines.
Yeah.
I mean, that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be that. It's not an excuse to do that. You should be able to create just what you want.
Yeah.
How about this movement with low cal? I don't understand it. But I was corrected the other day by a young woman when I said, "So you're saving 40 calories with a tasteless Sauvignon Blanc because it's 80 calories a glass instead of 120." She goes, "Yeah, that's right. I am saving 40 calories."
Okay. If that's what's tipping you over every day, then so be it. That's not what tipped me over, I don't think.
No, but isn't it to me, the point of a good glass of wine is a good glass of wine. Right?
Well, I think it's a reward. I mean, it really should reward you at the end of the day of a hard day, whatever it is, just to go, man, that's delicious and I enjoy drinking it. Oh, and it shouldn't be, I just saved 40 calories. I don't think that's the purpose and intent of a wine, or it shouldn't be any beverage for that matter, in my estimation.
But the main theme for the Fancy Food Show this last year was these non-alcoholic cocktails.
Mocktails.
Yeah, and non-alcoholic wine. And I will say there was one Prosecco, and I had the guy on the show, that was palatable.
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting, but I still don't get it.
Yeah, well, it's a real thing, this abstinence, if you will, of the younger generation of not drinking. I find it with my daughters who are not big drinkers at all, and they've grown up in a family of drinkers, if you will.
How old are they?
I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. And that generation, of course, they have other choices, and I think pot's one of them. So, and edibles and
is that the other stereotype of Washington and Oregon? Hey, you guys smoke a lot of weed up there?
I think that's Oregon. That's not Washington.
I taught my son-in-law Connor here, our engineer today, about premium sparkling wines, the champagnes and good quality other districts. Big mistake of my life. It's cost me a fortune.
Yeah. Don't turn them on to foie gras and pate, huh?
So what's next for the Bookwalter? What are you playing with things, working on stuff, planting varietals, testing them?
We're always playing with varietals. I find that some of the like Tempranillo seems to be doing well in Washington.
Really?
We're playing more with Grenache a little bit. I do a GSM for a club that I think's captivating. I think it's representative. It's definitely more Rhone-esque than maybe other regions that are trying to grow these varieties, or even though Grenache maybe. I think it's actually it's very fickle. It's very tough to grow.
Grenache is a tough animal.
Very tough. But I've gone down the slippery slope of restaurant touring, so that's taken up a fair amount of my bandwidth. But
I'd say a restaurant.
Yep. And then I'd say, distilling's in our future. I bought a still during COVID and it's idle, and I don't know where we're going to go with that. But, everything we do is literary. So I've got an LLC built around a brand that I would possibly bring forward to be all organic and from a Washington product that grows in Washington. I can't reveal it because I've got an NDA with the group right now. But we're might be the next.
Let's go to restaurant touring. I read on their website the name of the restaurant was
Fiction and the new one's Fable.
Oh, another one.
Yeah. We
Is
just
it on
opened that in
property
April.
or is this
The
separate?
Fiction's on property was the old winery, and so that's a standalone now. When we built the new facility, and then Fable's 5 miles down on the river. It's an old Irish bar that we repurposed, and it's more of a bar. And more
How are
pub
you
food.
finding that part of the industry? Fun, challenging?
Well, heck,
Why
I thought
did I do
thought
this?
I was good at math. You take two negatives and make it into a positive, but that's not necessarily true. There's a real social aspect to restaurateuring, and our area is it's a farming based initially community, and a lot of government work there, and a lot of chains. And so I always felt it was my job as a kind of civically minded to come back and bring some local expression to the dining scene, which there wasn't a real expansive one. So I'm trying to contribute positively to the area in terms of the dining options.
You keep that thought.
Oh, I've always served that. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that was somewhat cynical.
You were, it was a little sarcastic.
Yeah.
Well, because we've been around the restaurant
Yeah.
business. My daughter is a boulanger, and the only way that I could ever open a restaurant, which I would love, at least the romantic side of it,
Yeah,
because
like a winery.
hospitality is what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Right. And she's extraordinary at what she does. Is the only way I could open one is if she came home.
Yeah.
And so
bring
my
her
wife
home.
has actually approved this idea.
Oh,
If she comes home, and we need to give her something to do.
there you go.
So I haven't been able to
We'll
buy
see
a
you in the
location
restaurant
yet.
business.
Until she says I'm coming, Dad, and I can't do anything about it. But the hospitality business has always been something. I don't know why it intrigues me.
It's I tell you what, it gives me, people give me fuel. I think I find I get zapped by folks, and you meet a lot of great people in your restaurants, and there's nothing greater to provide enjoyment and pleasure to people. And I think that's what, if you do it right,
that's
you
what
love
it's
it.
about.
Of course, you don't like the times when they don't enjoy it,
Well,
but that goes with the territory.
That comes with the territory. But if you know what you're doing is their best effort.
On balance, we
and
get it
earnest.
right, and I think we provide that enjoyment and
Look
pleasure.
forward to
for
trying
folks.
that
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
ever get
Well,
back
you'll have to
up
come
there.
visit.
Yeah. The last subject is we're running around 48 minutes here. You were the president of this Washington State Commission for viticulture, right?
The chair of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that was a state
It's a state
commission.
board. Yep.
And what was its charter?
Charter is the marketing of Washington wines.
And that with the government support of that, was there a budget that was
Yep.
associated to
So
it?
we have a liter and a tonnage tax, or tax. I can't call it a tax.
Yeah.
And it is supported so that we voted it in as an industry. So we self-assessed ourselves. So there's a tonnage. I think it's $10 or $12 a ton. We all contribute. So I pay for the vineyards that we source from. If I take 100 tons from them, it's $12 a ton, and I write a $1,200 check. And then there's a liter tax, and we call it the Gallo tax because, of course, Gallo sells a lot of wine in Washington State. So actually, every wine contributes to our budget in Washington State to help promote Washington wine.
So if it's imported from California,
Doesn't matter.
it's
If it's
taxed.
sold in Washington. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So at the retail level, the
Yeah.
taxes.
Yeah.
And then
And any restaurant, anybody that sells has a license itself.
And then the commission's job,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been on many local, is to decide how to spend the money.
Correct.
Does the government have anything to do with how they spend the money? Or are they a representative on the board?
They do. It's a state board governed by the rules and regulations of a state commission.
Okay,
So just like the potato commission
Sure,
or
right.
the cherry commission or apple commission. So we can spend money in certain ways. We can't do it, and you can't go out and buy people a ton of liquor, for
Yeah,
instance.
of course, right. I mean,
But-
I'm talking-
so we have to operate within those guidelines. But there's the board of directors are all different wineries and growers. So there's the body that's on the board is really who crafts the plan with the commission employees. So, and I don't know how many employees we have at the moment. I haven't been on the board. I
So
was
if
on
you
it for 9
say
years.
we're going to spend $100,000 this year on social networking ads,
Yep.
Who implements it?
The commission would implement
The commission
that.
does. So
Well,
you would
they'd work
bring-
with local agencies. So let's say, for instance, we want to do a billboard campaign in Los Angeles, and we want to pay $100,000 and kick off all the injury lawyers off of all their billboards down here. And we put up Washington wine, it's the thing to drink, or whatever. We called it the perfect climate for wine. That was one of our taglines at one point. So we would decide as a board and the commission, said we all agree upon that's a good plan, and we would go implement it through local agencies.
You'd have to outbid Larry H. Parker.
I guess so. Jacoby and Myers.
Yeah, Jacoby Myers.
Only saw 17 on the way here from Manhattan Beach.
Well, we were driving the other day, and there's on the 605 or the 57, there's about 20 billboards that say, if you are caught aiding the city of Pomona in taking this billboard down, in big letters says you will be sued. So they're obviously in a lawsuit with the city of Pomona, and they've used their own billboards to promote their position, which I thought was fascinating. But this is interesting stuff. This commission things. Do they get along? Do the board doesn't have to get along? In other words, you're going to have spirited conversations and debates. But in general, does the winery owners and the proprietors of the farms agree with what you guys are doing?
I don't think there's always 100% buy-in.
No,
you never get it. But on the board itself, I'd say the Washington wine industry is still, we call it co-opetition. We're cooperative,
right?
But we're in competition with one another. But we also feel that we're still a nascent industry that has a lot to earn out there and a lot to grow. And again, to get our customers, building that bridge to our customers. So we all know, I think we're very earnest with our efforts and how we work and cooperate with one another. I don't feel I'd say any number of wineries I could walk into in Washington State and just go pick their brains, and they'd be happy to. And we still have that fraternal approach. That's where important. I don't think that exists maybe as much in other wine regions.
No, I don't think it does. And I think it's really important that you have camaraderie. You can disagree for sure.
Yeah.
But it's too complicated. There's too many variables to not share.
Yeah, and nobody has the best and right ideas. It's definitely collaborative.
And what you're, I'm going to ask you a question here in a second, but what you're making is the beginning of the idea around, we've got to make good product. This is your 26th vintage. I mean, like you're starting, but from a consumer awareness standpoint, you have to start with this.
Yeah.
You have to start with something that's good in the bottle.
And I'm the first tranche of second generation. I don't think there might be a third in Washington already, but there's hardly very few seconds.
I'm going to ask you, this is a book. It's called Wine is the Best Medicine, written about the 75. Dr. Murray was an MD in France and also a homeopathic doctor. Mm-hmm. And so he wrote this book, and it's like all these ailments, all these human ailments, and the curative wine.
Oh.
Right?
Different varieties, different regions?
Yeah, different. It's all French, obviously, in this case.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, but I figured you grow French varieties, so it's okay.
Yeah.
If I was asking an Armenian guy and he's growing Voskahat, you wouldn't know what that is. Yeah. But so let's say you had osteoporosis. You could. I'm going to give you a better one. No, I think it's good.
I don't think I suffer from that one yet.
There's flatulence.
Give me something.
Here.
Okay, let's talk about that. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm going to give you flatulence.
Heart disease. That's the easiest one. Come on, that's the softball, the big lob over the plate.
Let's do this. I could give you menopause.
I'd struggle with that one.
That'd be tough to do.
I haven't got there yet either.
All right, we're going to stick with my original one, osteoporosis. You could have, and there's a dosage to this. You could either have a Bordeaux, a Burgundy, or a Champagne. Now, no one gets. We get the accurate answers to this question is basically 33%. So no one's actually exceeded the idea.
Oh, there's correct answers to this.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the Master of Wine test. It's like we want to know what your answer is, but we also know why you got there.
Oh.
So if I have osteoporosis, I could drink a Bordeaux, a Burgundy, or a Champagne, and why do you think that would be your
good Lord. So I'm just shooting
from the hip. Yeah.
Well, I'd say it's Champagne due to the oxidative part, and the carbonation would bring more oxygen to your bloodstream and your bones, so you would build it back up.
That's a pretty good thought. It's wrong, but it's pretty good thought.
that's my life. Pretty good thought, but wasn't accurate.
But you said shooting from the hip, and that's osteoporosis, so that might be.
Yeah, well, there it is.
That might be good. Actually, it was Bordeaux. I gave you that. I wanted a Bordeaux since you grow Bordeaux varietals.
Well, I blew that one. Hey, Chardonnay's growing.
It says the diffuse decalcification of some important bones of the skeleton, often due to endocrine malfunction. You knew this already. The elements are biologically interconnected. That is, calcium is only really beneficial for the body in the presence of phosphorus. And these are high phosphorus wines. It actually says from the Medoc, so it can't be right bank stuff. And what's the dosage?
That's a question
How
to
much?
me.
Yeah, what's the dosage?
Silence.
How much?
What's it? Well,
Hey, that was
it shouldn't
brilliant.
be
Thank
more
you.
than a glass a day, right? According to our current
Oh
standards.
man,
Yeah.
you're not French.
Obviously I'm not. Maybe half
2
a bottle.
glasses of
2
Bordeaux
okay,
with
yeah.
every meal.
Oh, that makes every meal.
Yeah,
How many times are they eating over there? 3 times a day.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Main meals with the main meals one day and the same amount of. Oh, listen to this. This is the first time I've ever read this. Drink alternatively 2 glasses of Bordeaux wine with the main meals of one day and the same amount of Burgundy the next.
Oh.
So you like alternating between Burgundy and Bordeaux. That could be a fun
Well,
lifestyle.
this is how the French sold us red wine to begin with.
Yeah,
They
that's
said,
true.
Right? Oh, it softens the, we were a big red meeting, culture over here. And, red meat softens the
That's right.
the tannins in these wines. So here's a little interesting fact. When I went to get our website, Bookwalter Wines, Bookwalter, it was already taken. It's actually a medical tool called the Bookwalter. It opens up your heart, opens up your rib cage for open heart surgery. So the doctor was Bookwalter.
Yeah, when I Googled your name, I got it. John Bookwalter as a doctor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not me, obviously, because I couldn't even speak to what wines to drink to cure osteoporosis,
Man, had you gone
let
to
alone
medical
flatulence.
It's been a real pleasure having you here, and I hope you have a good.
That's been
Is it
great.
tastings tonight? The dinner.
The dinner's tonight. Yeah.
All right, I look forward. I was actually going to try and make it. Nick invited me, but it's not on the cards for me. But it's over on the west side, right? Yeah, Mar Vista. Yeah. If I was hanging out at Hermosa, it would be a little easier. But
You got to hang out more often.
But really a fascinating conversation and really interesting stuff. And we hope to get up to see you one day when
Love
we're
to
up
have
there.
you. Yep.
Come to the pub and do whatever.
Yeah, come hang out with us. It's a fun region. I'd love to introduce more of it to you.
Thanks for being here. Cheers.
Pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Callum-Carey. And don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.